We are now well and truly in the thick of it with this World Cup, which means everyone at Transfermarkt is working extremely hard to analyse every single player at the tournament. Whether it be data scouts, content editors, area managers, or my co-host Manu Vet, who's currently zigzagging around North America to cover the tournament, each and every one of us is focusing on which players are thriving and which ones simply aren't performing on the biggest stage in football. As such, this week's podcast takes a look at which players you, dear listener, should be taking a closer look at and keeping an eye out for as the tournament rumbles on. But rather than focusing on the same old wonder kids in Europe, we've turned to our experts in Asia, South America, and Africa to pick players that we think are set to make their mark at this tournament. Welcome to episode 15 of Market Values. Some of the most interesting nations and players at this season's World Cup have come from Asia, and I'm delighted to have Tiberius on the show. He's our area manager for Asia, and Tiberius, it's great to have you on the show for the first time. Welcome to the show and a debut on the podcast. How are you doing, and how are you enjoying the World Cup?
Thank you so much for the invitation. First of all, Asia is brilliant. I think nobody expected the performance from this from the Asian teams and the teams from Oceania. Some matches to go, but I think not a single Asian team has disappointed and even excelled their performances and expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually a good segue into the first player we wanted to talk about here, which is Keito Nakamura from Japan. I watched their game against the Netherlands in midweek and the start of the week, apologies. And I think he was one of the star players of the game in many ways. Obviously plays for Stade Rome in Ligue 2, I suppose now, in French football. How impressed have you been with him at this World Cup, and how important will he be for Japan at the tournament?
Yeah, Keito Nakamura is definitely one of the Asian star players this tournament and one of the best players of the continent in the past years. He's only 25 years old and moved to Europe at the age of 18, which is very rare for Asian players and especially players in Eastern Asia. So he is definitely very interesting for many European teams, and especially for the national team. He's always there at crucial moments, one of the best players scoring-wise, despite being mostly used at the wing position. And the match against Netherlands a few days ago he was like one of the men of the matches, if not the man of the match. His goal was very, very crucial and brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm struck by potential summer movement for him after this World Cup if he does continue to impress for Japan at the World Cup. He's been obviously playing in the second tier in French football, but he's been linked with remarkable number of clubs, to Tiberius, when you go on his rumor page, most notably Trabzonspor and Besiktas in Turkey, but also Sporting in Portugal. Do you think if he does continue to impress at this World Cup, he might find himself the subject of a lot of interest from clubs around Europe who might be thinking, hold on a minute, this guy's too good for the second division in France, we should go and try and sign him?
Yes, perfect. You mentioned that. He is definitely one of the most rumored players from Asia in the upcoming transfer window. He is already playing very good at the World Cup and has been going down with his team in the second tier in France. So he's definitely too good for his club right now. It's a big surprise he stayed with his team. And it's perfect you mention it because transfer expert Di Marzio already mentioned a potential move to AS Roma. He would be at the left wing deploy, and the way he played against Netherlands on global stage for everyone to see, that he would be a very good fit for Gasparini's football at the Roma.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really intrigued to see how he and Japan do, because obviously Japan always considered dark horses at these tournaments, and I think Nakamura is a perfect example of a player who very few people knew about, and then obviously develops into this kind of potential transfer target for a number of clubs. Another player who could do something similar to Tiberius, is the Uzbekistan winger Abbosbek Fayzullaev, apologies, who, I'm so intrigued by Uzbekistan at this World Cup because they strike me as, I mean, you can tell me yourself if you think so, but they strike me as maybe one of the most improved Asian teams in recent years. We obviously know about so many players. Kusanov's the perfect example for Manchester City, but there are other ones. And Abbosbek, he's now playing in the Turkish Super League, but it feels to me like he's a perfect example of a young player for a country that many people don't know much about, who could really use this World Cup as a perfect platform to show how good he and the nation are at this World Cup.
Yeah, you summarized it perfectly. Uzbekistan is definitely a team to watch, especially for talents. For the nerds who observed the youth World Cups around the world in recent years, definitely saw Uzbekistan surprising here and there, the big club, the big nations. So yeah, unlike Keito Nakamura, who's at his perfect age at 25 years old, Abbosbek is only 22. He's playing his very first year in Europe this season, and despite injuries, he has been scoring-wise very important for his team. So at only this age, he's already an important player for his club, and especially for the national team, he's extremely crucial. Uzbekistan is not having a very big pool of players, and Kusanov is overshadowing most from a star-wise point. But Abbosbek is definitely one to watch, and maybe the biggest or the big hope for the attacking third or the offense of Uzbekistan.
Yeah, absolutely. I've just checked his kind of history there, and obviously he played for CSKA Moscow for a long time. They signed him for just 500,000 euros a couple of years ago. He then moves to Turkey to Başakşehir for 7.5 million euros. I would imagine, Tiberius, if he does well for Uzbekistan at this World Cup, they might be looking at offers twice that perhaps already, because I saw he was also linked with Parma before he also made the move and Monaco before he made the move to Turkey. So do you think maybe he might be a player who could also be under a lot of transfer speculation if he and Uzbekistan can do well in this tournament?
Yeah, I think, as you said, lots of depends of if Uzbekistan can also surprise at the World Cup. They definitely have the potential to, and have the start of a golden generation, one could say. And yeah, right now we do not really have any rumors yet, mostly due to his minor injuries that have sidelined him from some parts of the season, but that didn't stop him from performing well. So as an attacking player in talent age, he's definitely one to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. And another one is worth watching as well. South Korean attacking midfielder Jun-ho Bae. Obviously, anyone who watches the English Championship and anyone who maybe has a season ticket at Stoke City will already know all about him. But we're talking about 22-year-old attacking midfielder Tiberius for a nation who always tend to do very well at the World Cup, at least in recent years and in recent decades. How excited are you with Jun-ho Bae, and how much potential do you think he has as a young player?
Yeah, I chose Jun-ho Bae for a couple of reasons. Unlike many Asian countries, Korea is kind of struggling producing a lot of talents due to various reasons, and he is one of the youngest players in the team. He is not a key player for the national team, but consistently playing, and he had a very difficult season for Stoke City. Stoke City hasn't performed perfectly or a little bit under expectations, but he also hasn't personally a very good reason. Due to that, we also do not really have rumors. He has already been a prospect for a couple of a couple of European teams, but he had never his breakthrough, and he has been playing well. 3 years ago, in his debut season for Stoke City, he was voted Player of the Season by the fans of his team, and has been rewarded with a call-up to the national team very young. We have yet to see him appear at the World Cup because he has picked up a slight injury in the last friendly ahead of the World Cup, but he's expected to play in the final match or maybe in a knockout stage, which is the aim for the Korean national team. Adding to the rumors question, he has switched agents reportedly a few months ago. So maybe if he can shine against the big players in the Korean offensive team, he might maybe find a new club this summer, as he wishes, apparently.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see, because I think when you look at that, as you said, when you look at that South Korean team, particularly in the attacking positions, you've obviously got, Lee at PSG, who's obviously a star player. But then beyond that, it's kind of Heung-min Song. There's still a huge dependency on him. I know at Besiktas, who was previously at Celtic. He's doing very well since making the move to Turkey. But aside from that, it's a lot of players who, as you said, maybe haven't quite found their feet, or maybe players who are getting a little too old. So you think there might be a potential opportunity for Bae, as you say, once he returns from that injury, to get a spot on that team or get some minutes in that team and then nail down a starting position perhaps for South Korea, and then as a result kind of confirm himself as a full international for South Korea at this World Cup.
Yeah, great that you mention it. He is suffering a lot from Korea's differences between attacking and defensive variety of players. Korea definitely shines from its options in the attacking third. So yeah, he's a bit behind due to minor injuries that he picked up, and he has the star players in front of him. So yeah, the final minutes he might receive in the last matches of the World Cup will be very crucial for him in the transfer window, as he reportedly wants to change his club. But yeah, we will see if he can use the World Cup as a stage to present himself.
Yeah, very interesting player, and my apologies to any Stoke City fans listening who are worried that good performances could see him leave this summer. We don't mean it intentionally, we don't mean it badly, but that's just obviously the nature of football. But we'll quickly move on to the next player before we get the wrath of all Stoke City fans around the world. And now, of course, it's Musab Al-Juwayr, who's a Saudi Arabian central midfielder. A very interesting player, Tiberius, because obviously Saudi Arabia themselves are a national team who are building up to trying to become a kind of top tier national side. He's currently the second most valuable Saudi Arabian player in the world, if I'm not mistaken. He made a big money move to Al Qadsiya for 11.5 million euros in 2025. I mean, these numbers kind of speak for themselves, I suppose, but from your own impressions, how good is he as a central midfielder, and how important will he be to Saudi Arabia at this World Cup?
Yeah, very good player to mention. He is similar to Korea, a big hope for the country. The national team is suffering from players reaching their climax, reaching the best age for football. So yeah, he's only turning 23 in a couple of days, and he's already one of the key players. He just earned a very, very big surprising point against top nation Uruguay. His performance has been all right. It has been solid, but he wasn't really excelling, you have to say. But yeah, as you said, second most valuable Saudi Arabian in the world, only 22 years old, central midfielder. He is extremely crucial for the future, and just ahead of the World Cup, he was eyed by many European clubs, reportedly, without specific teams named. Yeah, followed by the most valuable Saudi Arabian player who already moved to Europe, and he succeeded. There are not many cases like him, and yeah, Musab might be the next one.
Yeah. Do you think people outside of Asia, or maybe even outside the Middle East, underrate the Saudi Arabian national team? Do you think maybe just assume that, they're just there to fill up the numbers? And do you think he's maybe a good example of, no, actually Saudi Arabia are now producing good footballers who can compete at the highest level?
Yeah, that's a good question. And yeah, there's no correct answer to that. The West Asian football leagues are having a different physicality than most top leagues in the world or the top leagues in Europe. So it's very difficult for the players to adapt. And often the players also do not have exactly the interest in trying to adapt and challenge for a much lower salary contract in Europe. So yeah, Musab just joined a new team in Saudi Arabia a year ago, and probably receives a pretty good salary as one of the best footballers from his country. So yeah, there's interest from Europe, and we will see how solid this interest is. But there are not many cases yet to really compare the Saudi Pro League, the league he's playing in, with the top leagues in Europe, because it's a big challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll move on to the next player who's unlike the one we just spoke, but there maybe does have quite a lot of links to Europe in quite remarkable ways, actually, and that is Paul Okon-Engstler, the Australian midfielder. Now, an Australia international, Tiberius, born in Belgium, who, as far as I can tell, actually spent much of his career playing both in Belgium but then in Portugal before he then joined Sydney FC last year for free, and was probably one of the star players, and I think was, fair to say, a surprise win over Turkey in their first game in the World Cup. What strikes you about him? What makes him so interesting as a player to you?
Yeah, Paul Okon is extremely interesting. That's why he's named last in this list. As you pointed out the many nationalities and also citizenships he has. His parents are Australian and Italian, so he has also Italian citizenship, adding to his time in Australia and Belgium and Portugal. So yeah, he has seen everything, and he's only 21 years old. And as you said, the win against Turkey was brilliant, amazing. His assist, his long pass, opened the match for Australia, and it was his very first competitive international game for Australia. He only played a couple of friendlies, mostly starting 11, and yeah, I think the debut match on competitive level against Turkey couldn't be better.
Yeah, I was going to make a joke about whether he should have picked Italy, but then he won't be at the World Cup right now. So, but I'll refrain from doing so. Again, similar to maybe Saudi Arabia, though, in the sense that maybe people have kind of underrated this Australia team going into the World Cup, because perhaps it's full of more of these kind of more domestic players who are playing in domestic league where they don't get a lot of attention from European or global audiences. But I guess Paul Ocon's a good example of why we should be paying more attention to players outside of Europe, outside of South America, because when they do come to the tournaments like the World Cup, they show that they are just as good and can surprise a nation as good as Turkey.
But yes, he is. The A-League from Australia is just like most Asian leagues, experiencing a good number of exports to European leagues and top leagues outside of Asia. And especially the A-League itself is experiencing lots of young transfers, young talents leaving the league for higher and higher transfer fees, proving the point that the A-League is definitely a league to keep an eye on. And Paul Okon is the perfect example. He is set to break the transfer record of his club this summer, a record that was just set last season. And although clubs are yet to be named, there are said to be many interest from European teams, especially because of his history in Europe and maybe also the number of experiences he already has at a young age.
Yeah, absolutely. So fascinating. Tobias, thank you so much for coming on the show and honestly bringing to my attention a number of players I'd never even heard of. I'm sure most of our listeners will probably be in the same boat. And that is honestly one of the joys I have with doing this podcast, that we can, I can shine a light on the fantastic work that people at Transfermarkt are doing around the world. And you are a perfect example of that. So thank you so much for coming on the show, and we'll hopefully have you back on soon.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a joy. Thank you.
And we're now heading to South America, and I'm delighted to be joined by more or less half the South American team. About half the South America here on the podcast this week. We've got two regulars and one debut. Marcus Watts, the area manager for Brazil, Scott Christensen, South America area manager, and Samuel Vasquez, who is our Colombian editor. Samuel, first of all, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's great to finally have you on. How are you looking forward to Colombia at the World Cup?
Hello, Stefan. Yeah, it's an incredible opportunity to Colombia because We didn't play the last World Cup in Qatar. So yeah, we hope to have a good presentation and maybe go to the semi-final maybe.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Marcus, I won't ask you too many questions about Brazil because it was maybe a bit of a hiccup at the start of the tournament. And as a Scot, I'm not actually sure if I'm glad. I think I would have preferred Brazil picked up all 3 points and smashed Morocco. But are you at least enjoying it somewhat?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a good World Cup so far, and let's see, it's an interesting start for the group, and everyone has chances, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. And Scott, I think awkwardly this podcast goes out a few hours after Argentina's first game. So I don't know if we want to if we just want to pretend that Argentina won, Argentina lost, or but in general, how are you feeling about Argentina at the World Cup? Assuming magically we know what's happened, even though we're recording before the result.
Yeah, I mean, I think Argentina is going to have a good World Cup. We are not as solid candidates as in the last one, I think, because it's basically the same team, but 4 years older. We have some players that came up into the team, like Nico Paz or the one we're going to talk about, Valentin Barco, as they are like young talents. But I mean, we are a mix of experience, some few young talents, and a team that already knows how to play these competitions. So yeah, I expect Argentina to do a good performance.
Yeah, of course. And of course, there's always Lionel Messi as well, which always makes for a good tournament. But we're not here to talk about Messi. We're here to talk about players that people maybe don't know about around the world, and we want to shine a slight light on them. And we've got 4 players in particular from South America, from many of the fantastic nations in that part of the world. And Scott, I'm going to come back to you first, because the first player on this name on our list is Ordóñez. Apologies, the Ecuadorian central defender. Now, he plays in Belgium and he's been there for quite some time. His market value has been skyrocketing since he made a move to Club Brugge. And usually we would have Bart on the show, but we had him on last week and I thought I'll give him a break. We've been relying on him a lot recently. But obviously you're in South America and I'm sure you've seen plenty of Ecuador and Ordóñez before he maybe moved to Belgium. So what have you made from him in particular? And if I'm not mistaken, he's a key player to a team that are very good defensively, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, Ecuador, it's kind of has a rock solid defense because, William Pacho, Pierre Capié, Moises Caicedo, and now Jorge Ordóñez is like the 4th main man in their defense. I mean, even though Caicedo is a midfielder, obviously. But yeah, they are all players from the youth academy from Independiente del Valle, which I think is at the moment, if not the best, one of the best in South America, because the mentioned players all came from that team, so they are like the foundation of Ecuador. And yeah, Ordóñez he's been really good. He's kind of a similar player to William Pacho, as he's strong, physical center back. He's good playing from behind. He's good in aerial duels and on one-on-one situations. And yeah, he came to Belgium on 2022, if I'm not wrong. But he went to play for the reserve team in the 2nd division, and eventually, like a year and a half later or so, he became a regular in the first team, and he's now doing really good. He was actually going to be sold to Marseille last summer, but Al Hilal with the Saudi money came in and kind of got in the way of the negotiations. So as Ordóñez didn't want to go to Saudi Arabia, he ended up staying at Belgium, kind of with some tensions, but I'm quite sure that the guy will be playing in one of the top 5 leagues sooner than later.
Yeah, that was my next question, actually, with regards to his future, because, we expect him to obviously perform well. He did well in the first game, even though Ecuador lost 1-0. He's been heavily linked to Liverpool, Tottenham, Juventus, Chelsea, and fans of those clubs will be delighted to hear you compare him to William Pacho, who's obviously done very well at the very highest level. Do you think he's already ready to play at that level? Or do you think he maybe has to stay at Club Brugge for a couple more years to develop further, as he's only 22 years old?
I think it's at the exact point to go to one of the top 5 leagues. Like, he's still young and physically available to do everything. And he's already like kind of a mature player. He's won like 4 titles in Belgium. He's playing in the national team as a regular starter. He's kind of an experienced player. So yeah, I see him, as I said before, I see him in one of the top 5 leagues sooner than later.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll come to you, Simon, with player number 2, which is Gustvao Puerta for Colombia. For anyone who maybe hasn't had a chance to watch him, what type of player do you think he is, and how important is he to this Colombian team at the World Cup?
Yeah, Gustavo Puerta is the flag of our new generation. So Nestor Lorenzo, the head coach, has to show him during the World Cup. We have the third oldest national team in the tournament, but Puerta is our youngest player. So we have to promote his talent because, yeah, it's the golden generation beginning for our country. Currently, he is playing in Racing Santander. There are some European teams that want to see Gustavo Puerta in this transfer window: Villarreal, Real Betis, Bologna, Lazio, and Porto. And Racing is asking for a 10 million transfer. But I think that after the World Cup, that fee could grow to 15 or 18 million because his potential is incredible. And the World Cup is the perfect opportunity to have an important transfer of a youngest Colombian player in this World Cup. Puerta is a midfielder, and he have a very incredible potential, and he can play above players like Richard Rios or Jefferson Lerma. Could be interesting to see Gustavo Puerta getting out these reference or Colombian idols in this World Cup.
Yeah, I find whenever I think of young players announcing themselves at the World Cup, the player that always comes to mind is James Rodriguez. I don't know why. I don't know if it's fair because I'm sure people in Colombia and elsewhere know all about him, but I remember in that World Cup he did so well, moves to Real Madrid, and I still see people walking around the United Kingdom in Colombia tops with James Rodriguez on the back. Is there any kind of, I don't know, cultural expectation on young players from Colombia to go to the World Cup, announce themselves, and prove that they're good enough to play? Because as you said, he's playing for Racing Santander, moving down to La Liga 2. Do you think this is an opportunity for him to prove I'm better than that? I can go to a Villarreal, a Betis, or a Bologna, or maybe even a bigger club, depending on how he does at the World Cup.
Yeah, we didn't play the last World Cup in Qatar, so we didn't have a new generation to the world. I think that Gustavo Puerta is our wonder kid, so we have to improve this talent and make like a new James Rodriguez. Obviously, Gustavo Puerta is a different player, but yeah, I think that with this interest clubs, we have to have a similar case in the transfer window. Obviously, the fee is lowest, but I think that it's important transfer for the Colombian context after the World Cup.
Yeah, very, very interesting player. I'm really excited to see how he does when Colombia start kicking off at this World Cup. And Marcus, I'll come to you in Brazil, obviously one of the biggest nations, undoubtedly the most successful nation at the World Cup. They had a slight hiccup, obviously, against Morocco, but we want to touch on one player who didn't get an opportunity to play in that game, and that was, of course, Rayan. People in England obviously know all about him. People in Bournemouth know all about him, but maybe for folk who don't watch the Premier League, people who don't know Brazilian football, how special is this young player and how excited are you to see him at the World Cup?
Yeah, I mean, I think the word for Rayan is dynamic. He's been amazing for Vasco throughout his career there. He's played for the academy in Vasco. He was born and raised in Rio. Even his father played for Vasco, so he's very tied up to the club. And yeah, I mean, ever since the beginning of his career, he felt like a different kind of player. He's very explosive. He's that kind of fast, skilled winger that can sometimes play in a role similar to a number 9. I wouldn't say he's a proper number 9, but something that if he needs to play in a more central role, he can definitely. Yeah, he really made his path into the World Cup. He was surprisingly good for Bournemouth since the beginning. He's obviously a big part of the almost Champions League qualification campaign, and obviously they got a spot in Europa League, which is massive for the club. And he's been shining straight away in the Premier League. He got to the Premier League, he felt no pressure. he really plays football like he's playing in his backyard. So you see he's that kind of special player who doesn't really struggle in pressure. He really knows how he wants to play his game, and he knows how to develop. You can often see Rayan being that sort of player that will come back and help his defense. He will try to do everything he can to help his club and his team. And he is sort of the same player for Brazil. He didn't have that many opportunities so far, but every single minute he plays, every single minute he's on the field with a Brazilian shirt, he tries to give his max. He tries to do everything he can to help the team. And he already scored for Brazil in the last game against, I think it was 2 games before the World Cup. Brazil played Panama in Maracanã. He scored a brilliant goal for Brazil, and I mean he's on the right path to become a Brazil regular, Brazil starter in the future. I mean Brazil has been struggling at this World Cup already. It was a bit of a disappointing start against Morocco. I don't think the result it's what's most disappointing. I think the way Brazil played is what's more concerning for fans here. And we've been struggling at creating players. We've been struggling on the attack, and we should probably change some things in the next couple of games. And you might see Rayan get a few minutes against Haiti in the next match, and maybe you could see him play against Scotland as well. So, I mean, the path for him is set. I think he should be one of these players to get a few minutes in the next few games. And who knows, he might become a starter during the World Cup. But he's definitely one name for the Brazilian future. I wouldn't be surprised to see Rayan as the starting right winger for the next few years for Brazil.
Yeah, that was more or less my next question, actually. Having watched that opening game against Morocco, I saw a lot of criticism of Thiago, a lot of criticism of Paqueta. Obviously, both central midfielders were taken off. And then Ancelotti went, instead of bringing on someone like Rayan, he brings on Luis Henrique, who's a similar style player, similar position. Do you think Brazil fans are maybe frustrated that Ancelotti's maybe a little more conservative and maybe should have been a little more experimental or put more faith in Rayan? Or do you think he's just maybe protecting him and waiting for the right opportunity to introduce him to the squad as you say, as a starter, as a future star player?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, Ancelotti's been criticized a lot here in Brazil about not using some of his most talented players like Endrick, like Rayan. But I think if one person in the world knows how to deal with football players, is Carlo Ancelotti. We can trust him. And yeah, I mean, the players are very young. I know we all expect to see Lamine Yamal's, Endrick's, Ryan's playing in the World Cup and giving their best, but you have to realize it's like an insane amount of pressure on a player that young. You can't just throw him in the pitch and say, okay, go on and play football and nothing's going to change, nothing's going to come back and backlash on you. If a player that young plays in a World Cup and he plays badly, it could be massive to his career. It could be very negative for his future. So I think Ancelotti is aware of that, and he's trying to protect his players, and he's giving more experienced players some starting chances, some chances earlier in the tournament. But I believe that against sides like Haiti, Brazil should win quite easily, and we could see these young players play a few minutes. So it wouldn't be surprising to see Endrick and Haya play a few minutes against Haiti, and then who knows, if they do well, they can play against Scotland as well in more challenging matches for the World Cup to come. But yeah, it's a mix of protecting his players and giving more experienced players some game time as well.
Yeah. From a personal point of view, I hope he doesn't build up to the Scotland game and do tremendously well. It'd be nice if he waited till after that match. But either way, I do wish him luck, obviously, in this tournament. But Scott, we have to move on to the fourth and final player, and that's, of course, Valentin Barco, the Argentinian midfielder. I find him really, really interesting. A player for Strasbourg. We've seen his market value rise to 40 million euros this season in Ligue 1. What kind of player can we expect to see from him at the World Cup? How important will he be for Argentina? And I guess just finally, like when I look at that midfield options for Argentina, you've got some big names there. You know, you've got Palacios, you've got De Paul, you've got McAllister, Enzo Fernandez. Maybe some household names and big names, but maybe some players who look a little tired, maybe obviously getting older. Is there an opportunity here for someone like Barco to maybe step into that team and become, a future star for Argentina?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, I think Argentina's midfield is one of the best in the world, in my opinion, because, as you said, Enzo or McAllister or De Paul, when they play together, they are really strong. And yeah, so it's hard for him to get a place in the starting 11. But I absolutely see him in the future as one of the three midfielders in Argentina, because he's kind of similar to what De Paul does, like a very intense player, aggressive, but also skilled. So I don't see him maybe in the near future like as a regular starter, but eventually he'll end up being one. Yeah, I mean, for anyone who doesn't know him very much, yeah, he's a left-footed, very skilled. He has great vision. He has personality. He's aggressive. He used to play as a left back actually, and was too skilled. It's kind of what happened with Gareth Bale, that he was a left back, but he was too skilled to play there and moved upwards. So yeah, Barco, instead of going like to the front three, he's now playing on the midfield, but he's a polyfunctional player because he can play on the left wing or in the left midfield or as a central midfielder. So he's kind of, I mean, he's one of those players that wants to play. So he'll play on every position or wherever the coach wants him, just to get inside the pitch. So yeah, I mean, not maybe now in this World Cup he'll be a substitute, but it's kind of one of the one that gets more hopes from the Argentinians because of his personality and his style.
Yeah, I was struck with maybe some parallels to McAllister in the sense that the last World Cup he kind of emerged as this tremendous player for Argentina, and then somewhat off the back of his performances at the World Cup earned him that move to Liverpool. A former Brighton player, and then we've got another former Brighton player in midfield who's on the cusp of the first team for Argentina in a World Cup they're obviously expected to challenge for. Am I being silly to draw those parallels, or do you think this could be a World Cup where if he does get into that starting team, he performs well like McAllister, we could see something similar where some of the biggest clubs around the world are suddenly paying attention to him?
I mean, he's already going to Chelsea before this World Cup, so he already got the attention from a top team. But I think it's a bit harder for him than for McAllister, because McAllister now has the advantage that, I mean, the three starting midfielders are all World Cup champions, so it's really hard to put one of them in the bench. So he really, really, really has to perform to like make Scaloni decide to get one of those three out of the starting team. But yeah, I mean, I think that him and Nico Paz for sure will be getting several minutes in the national team during this World Cup. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of a parallel to McAllister because of the fact that he was at Brighton and they both played at Boca Juniors before. And yeah, it's kind of, they even kind of look similar. But yeah, I don't think he'll become a starting player during the World Cup, to be honest, because as I said before, the three that are playing are like big names.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't realize that he was on his way to Chelsea. I know he joined Strasbourg. I know it's usually assumed that they move on to Chelsea, but I wasn't aware that it's already confirmed. So I guess I could just take that question back. But that's still fascinating. Even if he doesn't get a started role, I'm sure Chelsea fans will be very excited to see how he does. And Argentina fans, of course, if he does come on it and play in that game. Well, guys, that's all the time we have for now, but thank you so much for all coming on the show. Samuel, thank you for making your debut on the podcast, and Marcus and Scott, your insight is always invaluable and very, very appreciated. So I guess I can let you guys go and enjoy the World Cup. And I'm now joined by our French colleague, Rono Karoff, to discuss the African segment of this week's podcast. Lots and lots of interesting players, of course, from the African nations. Probably a mixed result so far from the top teams, but some doing very, very well and impressing, specifically Morocco, who I enjoyed watching against Brazil on Saturday night. Certainly one of the dark horses for the competition, I suppose. And Rono, even though you are our area manager for France, you obviously take a lot of interest in African football. And as we go through these 5 players, I think just about every single one of them, maybe not all, but certainly more than others, do have some link to France in one way or another. And I guess the best way to kick things off with is perhaps the most obvious one, and that is Luca Zidane. Now, I know he didn't actually play in French football, if I'm not mistaken, but as we all know, he is one of the sons of Zinedine Zidane, and he has opted to represent Algeria, who, of course, Zinedine Zidane could have represented once upon a time as well, where his family are from. Talk to us about Luca Zidane. What can we expect from him maybe at this World Cup from Algeria? And I guess for people outside of France, what is his reputation like in France, where he's obviously known as the son of Zinedine Zidane?
So I'm glad to be here on this podcast again about Luca Zidane. Well, he has been always playing in clubs in Spain, of course, since his father was at the time the coach of Real Madrid when he started to play at youth and I think pro level. His father, Zinedine, was still the coach of Real Madrid. But still, he built his career in all Spanish clubs. He started at Santander, then Rayo Vallecano, Cordoba, and lately Granada in the second tier. So he's really built in the Spanish football system, even if he's got a few goals in the French youth national team as a goalkeeper. I think in 2018, 2019, but it's been long gone. But I think his call to the Algerian national team came as a bit as a surprise because I would say that a nation as ambitious and with a lot of known talent as Algeria, picking a goalkeeper in the second tier of Spain could be a bit surprising. And of course, with a name like Zidane, people could think a bit of nepotism. But so far, he's been rather great with national team. I think he's got 7 games played since last fall when he was introduced in the team. And from these 7 games, he scored 5 clean sheets. So I think he raised a lot of doubts from observers from both, I think, Algeria and France, because I think also on their side, they could be, maybe we have some home-brewed talents from the Algerian leagues that could deserve an opportunity, because there is a bit of a void, I would say, void or vacuum at the goalkeeper position for a few years now in Algeria. There has been some players who held the fort for many years before, but they got older, and then it was a bit tougher to fill that gap. But so far, it seems that Luca Zidane could be a bit of a rather nice bet for that, because he's also quite experienced yet, because we might not know him too well, but he's already 28 years old. So he's got a lot of experience behind him. And with formation with the French youth teams and a lot of different work environment in Spanish football, I think he's got a few cards up his sleeve to be a great asset in the Algerian defense.
Yeah, the unfortunate nature of recording a weekly podcast during a tournament like this is that sometimes we will record just before a game starts. And in this instance, Algeria would have played Argentina a few hours before this podcast is published. So people listening to this will probably already know if he did start for Algeria in their first game. But as you said, his market value is €1 million, but that's higher than the 2 other Algerian goalkeepers in the team. We got Benbo, whose market value is 850k, and Mastil, whose market value is 250k. I guess we'll know the question has to be, is Zinedine Zidane, if his son Luca does play for Algeria, do you think he'll be supporting France this World Cup, or do you think he'll be supporting Algeria? Which I guess is always a discussion for the Zidane family every 4 years at the World Cup.
It was actually a bit of a talk in French media in the past few days, that because there is France versus Senegal at 9 p.m. French time tonight, and Algeria versus Argentina at 3 a.m. in the night. So it was about which game will Zinedine Zidane attend, and his choice went to Algeria versus Argentina. So he will focus more on his son than the French national team, at least for the start of the competition. So I think that, I hope that won't bring too much pressure on his son. But that should be a fun meeting before the game between father and son.
Yeah, I think so. And as you said, that name Zidane certainly carries a huge amount of pressure in football. As we were just recording before, we were just discussing before recording, he's not obviously the only Zidane son to play football. But we move on to other names and to other nations, and certainly a nation who Zinedine Zidane might not be watching just yet is that of Ivory Coast. And we have to touch on a central midfielder, Rono, who we have discussed on the podcast recently because he's doing some remarkable things in Turkey at Trabzonspor, and that is Inao Oulaï. What can we expect from him at this World Cup? It's worth noting, and like I said, we talked about his market value rise on a recent podcast, but from the start of last season, or around this time last year, his market value was about 600,000 euros at Bastia. It's now 23 million euros. And to no great surprise, he has seen his kind of presence in the Ivory Coast national team kind of rise. He now has 10 caps for the Ivory Coast, including 13 minutes against Ecuador in their very important 1-0 win over Ecuador in the first game of the competition. But what can you tell us about this young midfielder?
Well, I think I was a bit surprised when he joined Trabzonspor in Turkey last season because he had a decent hype around him, but in the level of Ligue 2, second tier of France. So seeing a 5 million fee for a player that wasn't really valued at the time was still quite surprising, but he's shown us from the whole season with his club in Trabzonspor in Super League, and also with his first goal in the national team of Ivory Coast, that he's had a lot of potential that he can really showcase in the midfield. And I think it's even tougher for him to break into the midfield because we know players like Franck Kessié, Seko Fofana, who have been really key players, pillars of the Ivory Coast national team for years and years. So seeing him start to make an impact, like in the recent AFCON, he's had three starts in the 5 games that the team has played there. And I think that really put him a bit more on the map internationally because, of course, there is some light on Turkey, but being on the international scene helps to showcase even more his talent. And I was actually recently at the friendly game the Ivory Coast played against France earlier in June. And when he entered the field as a substitute in the last 20 minutes, I think that's a time when the Ivory Coast fans were almost allowed us to be like, Inao. They were shouting his name when he entered the pitch. So I think there is a lot of promise and hype around him nationally. And of course, I think there is a ceiling that it will be interesting to see if Emers Faé, the coach of Ivory Coast, will be willing to push a bit aside the big names, like I said, Fofana and Kessié, to put more room for Inao Oulaï in such a big competition, because we see this time and time again in club or national team football. You can have a really promising talent who's already shown himself, but to really trust him with games that really, really matter, it's also something that would be interesting to see if he stays on the bench as like a 12th man, or if he would be given a bit more the keys of the Ivorian midfield.
Yeah, you touched on it a moment ago, but it's definitely worth focusing on because when you look at the midfield, the other midfielders in that Ivory Coast team, many of them are approaching the end of their careers. You got Seko Fofana at Porto, who's 31. You got Franck Kessié, as you mentioned, he's now playing in Saudi Arabia. I thought that was a St. Etienne badge next to him, but no, it's Al-Ahly. It's very similar when you're maybe not focusing, but he's 29. Jean-Michel Seri, he's 34. And okay, Ibrahim Sangare is only 28 at Nottingham Forest, but he hasn't maybe had the best end to the season. So I guess you could argue that position in the team is open to a young player coming in, making a name for themselves and saying, I'm the new star of this Ivory Coast team in this position. I know they obviously have other outstanding players. Yan Diomande is probably as we would say, the poster boy of this national team. But at least in that midfield position, there's space there for Inao Oulaï to kind of step in at this World Cup and say, I'm the new central midfield star of this Ivory Coast side.
Yeah, I think overall the coach of Ivory Coast really made a rather smooth transition with younger talents, like you mentioned, also Domande, and there is guys like Bazoumana Touré who plays in Offenheim, or guys like Ange-Johan Bonny and Al-Juwayr who've been in the French youth systems for years and have just opted for Ivory Coast too. So I think this World Cup will probably serve as a last major competition for some players around 30 or a bit above 30 years old, and really open the door to give more opportunities and responsibilities also for the younger talents, especially for Inao Oulaï, who I think compared to the players in the midfield so far in this national team is really the only one in his age group. So I think he's a one to build something in the next season. There is a really good chance that it will be around him.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, another young player who we certainly should have to touch on, maybe doesn't have the kind of same presence as, an Ivory Coast midfielder who's doing a remarkable job in Turkish football. But that is, of course, the young centre forward, Hamza Abdelkarim, who has a really interesting backstory, Rono. We're talking about a young player who came on late on in Egypt's 1-1 draw with Belgium. But some users or listeners might be interested in knowing that he actually joined Barcelona for 1.5 million euros this year from Al Ahly, the Egyptian club. We don't know a huge about him, Rono, but one thing that really stood out to me when I was doing a bit of research, when you look at his record for Egypt's under 21 side or under 17 side, he's got 12 goals and 6 assists in 21 games, which I'm sure is what not only attracted the interest of Barcelona, but is also why he's now been called up to the Egyptian first team. And while that Egyptian national team maybe is not as strong as it was in the past, it still has some very, very big names up front in Omar Marmoush and Mohamed Salah. So what do you think we can deduce from Abdelkarim so far, and what can we expect from him at this World Cup?
Well, I think it's a bit of a surprise to see him called up this early and on such a big scene, because I think when I checked, Egypt is amongst the oldest average age, around 29 years old in this World Cup. So calling a player who hasn't had a previous experience with a senior national team and barely ever even any professional experience with both as Al Ahly or Barcelona is kind of a gamble. But like you said, he's been already on the radar of major clubs, and Barca took the win on that side during last winter with a loan that will be active with an option that will be activated this summer for 1.5 million euros, and I suppose with a lot of bonuses that can bring this fee some higher. And from what I saw, he's been also quite efficient with Barca under 19 team, with 6 goals in 11 games in half a season. So both in youth club team and youth national team, like you said, with under 17, there is a lot of impact is made. And I think with the under 17 of Egypt, it was made mainly as a World Cup in last November that he made probably a lot of light on himself and attracted all these clubs. But yeah, for this World Cup, I think he will be given like this few minutes here and there to relieve better known names like Marmoush, like Mohamed Salah, who of course have been some of the key offensive assets for the Egypt national team. And seeing maybe a player like him who's been rather not too well known with compared to the players that will start in front of him could be quite interesting actually to lead some opponents to, I would say, towards wrong direction, but at least they won't know what to expect of him, because you probably don't even have any opportunities to really scout this type of young players. And actually went back to what as one of our data scouts from Egypt said to our colleague Manu Vet a few months ago in a paper about him, that he's rather modern day striker, and that in the fact that he actually take quite a good part in like the build-up play. He doesn't stay in the front. He easily goes back down to the midfield to really help to bring the game forward. And I think that's a really interesting profile in this type of World Cup games that we've seen so far, that can be quite open and a lot of counter-attacks possible, a lot of movement. And I think this type of players, especially if he enters at the end of a game when everyone is tired, could bring a lot of energy to the game.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the kind of prospect that really fascinates me about, and specifically this point in their career where they're getting a call up to the national team, because we've got a young centre forward in Abdelkarim who's got a market value of 1.5 million euros. He's only just joined Barcelona. As you said, he's only had a handful of games for the youth team, but he's now playing for his national team at the World Cup, getting minutes, potentially might, perform, score goals. He could then potentially return to Barcelona, who've just released Robert Lewandowski, a centre forward. And, we're talking about a football club here who, under Hansi Flick, have no concerns about promoting youth players when they think they are ready to play. So at this moment in time, in the middle of June, Abdelkarim has a market value of 1.5 million euros, Rono. Very few people know about him, perhaps outside of Egypt and maybe some, Barcelona fans. But very, very quickly, if he performs for Egypt at this World Cup, we could be talking about a player that in 6 or 8 months' time is a regular starter for Barcelona, and potentially a star in the making.
I was thinking that, with the half season I had also with the under-19 team of Barcelona, I think there's a good chance that he either promotes to the reserve team or Barcelona maybe loans him out to play some professional football in the slightly less exposed environment, but still gain a lot of experience. Or also, like you said, there is a possibility for a more direct promotion to the first team, but I guess that will depend also on what is happening in the preseason, depending on who is brought in the transfer window to Barcelona. If that's maybe closes a few doors or open a few others for Abdelkarim, we will see. But yeah, I suppose his value won't stay long at 1.5 million. I think there's a lot of potential to see that rise in the next year.
Yeah, I think so. Well, we have to move on. And the next player is a player that, okay, admittedly, most people listening to this podcast will know about. I know this section is supposed to be about players that most people don't know about, but we can't ignore him. And that's, of course, the Moroccan midfielder, Ayyoub Bouaddi. Rono, I watched him against Brazil, and against a Brazil team that has a number of aging and maybe slow centre midfielders, I thought Bouaddi looked like a world star. He's got a really interesting backstory, and you've been covering this quite a lot for Transfermarkt, and you're making us all very well aware of it, that he obviously came up through the French youth team setup. So he's played for the under-16s, under-17s, under-18s, under-20, under-21, but then made his debut for the Moroccan national team at 18 years and 7 months, and has very quickly developed into a very, very important player for them. And at 18 years old, Rono, I think he might be one of the most impressive and exciting midfielders at this World Cup.
Yeah, I would say as a French football fan, I'm quite frustrated, disappointed to see him go for another team than France. But of course, with how stacked the French midfield is, and the level that Bouaddi has shown already with Lille for the past few seasons, it makes sense that Morocco will come knocking on his door and probably attract him with more playing time early on. And so far, the bet seems to have been successful with all the pre-World Cup friendlies. And then this first game with Brazil has already been given a lot of responsibility, and he's shown the same qualities that he has with Lille so far. Also, like a lot of calm in the midfield. Compared to his age, you would expect probably a player of his age to, I would say, make some more mistakes, but like he's playing, I would say, above his age. Like he's really well composed, calm, really, I would say, already a kind of leader in the midfield in some way. Like he really dictates the pace of the game. So it's really a interesting player, and for sure, if he creates the same type of performances as he does against Brazil recently, I think that will bring a lot of attention around him for this transfer window. As in France, with already before the World Cup and for a few months now, we've had noise around interest from PSG, of course, the best team of the country. But with the World Cup exposure, I think that will bring a lot of international candidates around him also, and probably that will rise the fee even more. Because so far, with 50 million euros, I think he's surely around the most valued non-PSG players of Ligue 1. But if he really scores an impressive World Cup with Morocco, I think there's a chance that he rises even a bit more above that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was just checking as you were speaking. He's already the 12th most valuable centre midfielder in the world. And when you filter that down to under-19s, he is the most valuable centre midfielder in the world. So obviously we're huge fans of him at Transfermarkt. I have to ask you again about just to kind of a little more focus on his potential future, because I think a lot of people expect Morocco to do very well at this World Cup. They've obviously shown against Brazil that they can go against some of the best teams in the world. The PSG links are obvious. They're obviously linked to every decent player in Ligue 1, but he's also very heavily linked with move to Arsenal and to Bayern Munich. What kind of situation or what kind of approach do you think Lille will take to his the interest shown in him this summer? Do you think they'd be willing to sell him? Do you think they want to hold on to him? And as you said, do you think if all three of those clubs are serious about signing him, then the transfer fee could end up being more than his market value of 50 million euros?
I think the fees will easily go quite higher than the market value we know so far, because Lille has been known for not really bargaining for their top talents. So it's often been really high fees for players that really were essential to their team. And especially if there is a bit of, how can I say, when many teams are fighting against each other to sign him, that will probably bring the fee even higher. And I think it will also be a game of seeing which team can make room for him early on, because I mentioned PSG, but they already have quite a stacked midfield with Vitinha, Neves, Ayer, Ruiz, and of course Bouaddi won't be staying on the bench if he joins such a team. So it's also a matter of how the team will adapt the strategy to make room for a talent like him. So I think there is a chance that the fee will be, if I had to do an estimation right now, I think that could rise to maybe 70, 80 millions easily, especially this if his World Cup is really complete, really a lot of great games. If Morocco goes far, I don't know, quarterfinal, semi-final, something like that, will probably even put Bouaddi even more on the map than he already is. And I think there's a chance that really becomes one of the main sagas of the transfer window. And I was just seeing that his contract runs actually until 2029 for Lille. So if he has to go this summer, that won't be for a really low fee. I think that will be on the rise.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's always certain players who seem to become kind of global stars at each World Cup, and I think Bouaddi is a perfect candidate for that at this year's tournament. And finally, in our list of kind of African players to keep an eye on is another famous name, but maybe not the player people are thinking of, and that's, of course, Guela Douai. Of course, the brother of Desiree Douai. But unlike his brother, he doesn't play for France. He plays for the Ivory Coast. And unlike his brother, he isn't a winger or a forward or a number 10. He's a right back. But Rono, for people who don't know about Douai, the Ivory Coast player, what can you tell us about him? Because it seems as though he's done very well in Ligue 1 as a player, but also very well for the Ivory Coast as well.
Yeah, he's actually the lesser known brother of the two, but he's the older brother. Like, he's already 23 and will be 24 in next October. But his reason in the Liga ranks a bit more quietly. Like, he's been playing with his brother Desiree when he exploded in Stade Rennais a few seasons ago. They shared a few games together, and it was quite nice to see the combination between the two brothers on the pitch, but they took different paths. Of course, we know Desiree Douai completely revealed himself to the face of the world with PSG and the French national team, but Guela Douai got sold for, I will check again, I think that was only 6 million euros by Stade Rennais to Strasbourg 2 seasons ago now. And we all know that with Chelsea behind Strasbourg, they will aim for a lot of young talents. But in this really young team of Strasbourg, he's been quite actually becoming quite easily one of the leaders, actually a co-captain who was armband on a few games this season, and he's been one of the most used player this season with Strasbourg, and that of course attracted also the eyes of the Ivory Coast national team. He wasn't there back when they won the previous AFCON in the winter of 2023, I think, but right after that, he was one of the first new faces of the team, and from that point, he really continued to hold a steady place in this roster. Like, he already has more than 20 goals with the Ivory Coast national team in 2 years. He's really often the starter on the right back position. That is a position which otherwise in this World Cup there is names like Kosunu, who plays for Atalanta, and Wilfried Singo, who is now in Turkey, but who are more center backs who could be assets on the right back position. But now it makes more sense that Douai is a clear starter for Ivory Coast. And like Inao Oulaï that I mentioned previously, he was one of the main names of the friendly against France a few days ago, and he was I would say, player of the match. Like he scored the goal that put Ivory Coast back in the game after France opened the score. And later on, he delivered the assist for Amad Diallo to deliver this stunning win for Ivory Coast above France. So I think he also arrives with a lot of confidence and ambition for this World Cup. So I think that's one of the main names to follow. And I suppose he can quite easily become a topic for the market, for the next transfer window. There has been some noise in the previous one. I think with AC Milan was one of the main clubs looking for him, but in case of a great World Cup, I think many clubs will come knocking on the door of Strasbourg, who might be willing to sell him to bring even younger talents in his place. Maybe 23, getting too old for Strasbourg already.
Yeah, as crazy as that sounds. There was an interesting article in March, or report in March, that actually linking him with the move to PSG. Now, as you said, because he's at Strasbourg, there's always a possibility of him maybe moving to Chelsea if he performs well enough. But do you think there's a possibility that he could maybe move to PSG and reunite with his brother?
Not sure, because the right back position in PSG is held by Achraf Hakimi, who is really one of the key players of this league. So if Hakimi doesn't leave, I don't think they will sign Guelad to just be a substitute to Hakimi. I think it's best to find a team that will really give him the keys of this right wing, of the right side of the pitch. And that if he comes to PSG, I think that will be more a few seasons down the line when he's really made a bit more of a first name for himself and not just be Désiré Doué's brother. But I think the next step might not be in France. I suppose there is a lot of international teams that will have eyes on him and have also the money required to bring him and to convince Strasbourg to let him go.
Either way, it'll be very interesting to see what he does. And with all these players, it'll be fascinating to see how they do at this World Cup, but also what happens to each of them in the summer transfer window, because I think in all but maybe one or two of them will be hot topics for transfer fees. But Rondo, that's all the time we have. But as ever, thank you so much for your excellent insight, not just in French football, but in African football as well. And we look to hope you have on the show again soon. So enjoy the World Cup and we'll speak soon.
Yeah, thank you.